Father cheated, became a volatile stranger, insisting on walking me down the aisle, but I finally told him he's not welcome at my wedding. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and last night I snapped during a family dinner. I ended up telling my father, who's 56, that I'd rather have a stranger walk me down the aisle than him. My father always dreamed of my brother and me having traditional weddings. Ever since I was a child, he would talk non-stop about how much he looked forward to walking me down the aisle. For a long time, I felt the same. It was something special we shared, and I could see how much it meant to him. But everything changed the day I discovered he had cheated on my mother. It turned out the affair was a one-time thing, at least physically, but he kept in contact with the other woman for over a year before my mother found out. That revelation shattered the way I saw him. My mother decided to forgive him, but to me, he became a different person. What made it worse was how he acted after being caught. He grew increasingly aggressive, started drinking more, and became distant and harsh. The man I'd looked up to faded away, replaced by someone I could barely recognize. As I entered my teens, our relationship continued to deteriorate. Now that I'm in my 20s, I've spent a lot of time thinking about my own wedding someday. There's no doubt in my mind, I do not want him walking me down the aisle, not after everything that's happened, even though I know how much this will hurt him. Instead, my brother and I decided he'd be the one to walk me down. My brother had always acted as the father figure I needed when growing up. I barely speak to my father anymore, but every year my mother hosts a family dinner that he inevitably attends, since they are still together. He always uses these get-togethers as an opportunity to get drunk and air his grievances, mostly complaining about how we don't talk to him anymore. The only reason I keep showing up is for my mother. I love her and don't want her to feel abandoned. I've tried to spend quality time with just her, but my father always finds a way to force himself into our plans, and frankly, it isn't worth the inevitable scenes. But last night, I just reached my limit. We were gathered for dinner, and the conversation turned to weddings. My brother had recently proposed to his fiancée, so he and my mother were discussing some of their plans. My father, already tipsy at that point, suddenly started going on about how excited he was to walk me down the aisle when I got married. That's when I just couldn't take it anymore. I told him, as calmly as I could, that my brother would be walking me down the aisle. I even tried to soften the blow by suggesting he could walk my mother down before I entered, so he'd still have an important role. There was a very long, heavy silence. Then, my father exploded. He started yelling, calling me an ungrateful brat and insisting he couldn't believe I would repay him like this after everything he'd done for me. I stayed quiet and let him rant, but when he sneered that I should be grateful he even wanted to walk me down the aisle after how I've treated him, I lost it. I blurted out that I'd rather have a stranger walk me down the aisle than him, and he should count himself lucky if he even gets an invitation to my wedding. I know my words were brutal, but after years of enduring his outbursts and watching him treat my mother and me like this, I just snapped. He broke down and started sobbing, repeating over and over what a terrible person I was for taking this from him. How could I do that after everything? I couldn't take being there any longer. I left the dinner soon after. Today, I woke up to a barrage of texts from my mother, telling me I shouldn't have said those things, that I know how my father gets when he's been drinking, and that I should have just kept quiet. My brother is firmly on my side, but I know deep down my mother is right. I've endured my father's drunken tirades enough times to know that silence really is the safest response. Still, when he said those things about me last night, I just couldn't hold back my anger any longer. Update 1. It's been 2 days since I broke the news to my alcoholic father that he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle, and things have spiraled further out of control for both me and my brother. As I processed everything, I began to understand that, while my mother had shielded us from the worst of the abuse, she was still an enabler, never intervening to truly stop my father's destructive behavior. Still, she's my mother, and cutting her off immediately didn't sit right with me. I needed to at least try to fix things before making such a big decision. I sat down with my brother and we talked it over, coming to the conclusion that we needed to have a final conversation with our mom, just us, no interference from our dad. So I finally responded to her texts, explaining that we needed to talk alone. I told her in no uncertain terms that if dad showed up, I'd walk right out, and maybe go no contact altogether if she didn't respect this boundary. She agreed. We settled on meeting at a small cafe for lunch, my choice. I arrived early, nerves eating away at me as I waited. About 15 minutes later, I saw her walk in. Trailing behind her, unsurprisingly, was my father. Maybe I was still naive to believe she'd come alone, but I had truly trusted her this time. Without a word, I got up and left. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I followed through. I blocked her on everything, trying to carve out a protective distance between us. I genuinely thought that would be it, that the line was drawn. But this morning, I opened my door to find her standing there, this time, without dad. She looked completely lost, disheveled in a way that was hard to see. I couldn't just close the door on her, so I let her in. What followed was a long, painful conversation, 2 hours of heavy, teary words. I laid it all out, how deeply her choices had hurt both me and my brother, how dad would stay cut off until he was at least a year sober, and how she needed to encourage him to get better, or walk away, herself, otherwise, she'd lose us too. I promised her that, if she did decide to leave, my brother and I would have her back, both financially and emotionally. During our talk, She finally opened up about the real reason she wouldn't leave my father. She confessed that she was the one who had cheated first, an affair with a coworker back when she was waitressing. Instead of leaving her, my father decided they'd stay together, but only on his terms. She told me about these rules: he could have at least one hall pass, she couldn't speak to men or work her old job, and she had to give him complete access to her finances. If she broke his rules or tried to leave, he'd out her to her family, who were staunchly against infidelity, and do everything to ruin her life. Hearing all of this, all I wanted was for her to choose freedom, to realize she still had us. Her confession cut deep. Learning my mother was also unfaithful shook the foundation of everything I believed. I tried, again, to tell her it wasn't too late to walk away. But, despite all my pleading, she apologized for everything but said she was staying with him. Now, I feel like I've lost both of my parents. I've been a sobbing wreck all day. It's heartbreaking. This isn't the outcome I wanted, but at least I still have my brother. Maybe, in time, I'll be able to process this and move forward. For now, I just need to rest and let the pain settle. As I think about it more, I realize it might have sounded like I'm justifying my mother's affair. I want to be very clear, I'm not siding with her or defending her actions. I simply wanted her out of a relationship that is toxic on both sides, but ultimately, she's an adult, and she's chosen to stay. All I can do now is focus on making sure I don't repeat their mistakes, and hope they both get the help they desperately need. I can't pretend I'm not still furious at my father for his abuse, but I also can't ignore that my mother played her part too. I have some sympathy for how trapped they both seem, but I don't support or agree with either of their choices. Writing all this out has made me realize just how much her affair affected my family, how it twisted the narrative I'd held for years: dad the villain, mom the hero. Now I see it's not that simple, and it's a lot to take in. I've told my brother everything. He's looking into therapy, too. We both need a chance to heal from all this. Update 2. I thought the dust would settle after my mom told me she was staying, but the opposite happened. I couldn't shake what she'd said about the hall pass and the contact that never really ended. It kept buzzing in my head until I did something I didn't plan on doing. I found the woman my father slept with. I wasn't sure I'd even send a message, but my fingers did it before my brain caught up. I kept it short: who I was, that I knew, that I wasn't looking for a fight, just clarity. I didn't expect her to respond. She did within an hour. Her version lined up with what I already knew, and then it went 1 degree darker. She said it had been one time, yes, but he treated that one time like a license. He'd text her holidays and late nights. When she blocked him, he showed up at her work to talk, acting like it was normal because he told her his marriage was restructured after my mom cheated. He made it sound like he was allowed to see her. She said he wasn't aggressive the way people think of aggression, but he didn't take no for an answer and had a way of making you feel like you owed him a conversation. She ended up telling her manager, had security walk him out without making a scene. The last time he reached out was a few weeks ago from a new number with, just checking in on a friend. She didn't answer. She apologized to me even though I hadn't asked for that. Reading her messages, I felt sick. I believe her. It was like seeing the same pattern but from a different angle. 2 nights later, my brother's fiancée's parents hosted a small engagement dinner. It wasn't formal, just family, and my father wasn't invited. We told my mom she could come if she wanted. She hesitated and then said, he wouldn't like that, and stayed home. I thought that was the end of it until we were leaving and my brother froze in the doorway. I looked past him and there was my father at the edge of the driveway, leaning against his car like he was waiting for someone to bring him a jacket. He had that swagger he gets when he's 3 drinks in and trying to pass for sober. He said my name like it was a warning and opened his arms to me like I'd come running. I didn't move. My brother stepped between us, and my father started in, something about family duty and how he was done being punished. The host came out, then a neighbor, and it was enough of a crowd that he backed off, but he stared at me the way you look at someone you can't decide if you love or hate. He left muttering, "You'll see." I went home shaking. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, my phone pinged with an alert I didn't recognize at first: unknown accessory detected moving with you. I thought my brain was playing tricks on me. I don't use stuff like that. The alert followed me from the engagement dinner to my apartment. I walked around my living room with my heart in my mouth until I thought to check my bag. The air tag was zipped into the lining of the little inside pocket I never use. It took me a full minute to get my fingers to stop trembling enough to pry it out. I sat there with it in my palm like it might bite. I didn't sleep at all after that. In the morning I drove to my mom's. I didn't text first. I didn't want anything showing up on a screen he could see. She opened the door and I didn't even have to ask. She knew something was wrong. I held up the air tag without a word and I watched the color drain from her face. She said she'd gotten those alerts a couple of times when she was with me, but figured it was a glitch or someone else's device nearby. I saw it click in real time. She went quiet and then she said, very softly, "I think I'm ready to go." There wasn't a plan beyond that sentence, but we moved like we'd rehearsed it. She grabbed a duffel and her documents from a drawer that I later realized had a false bottom. She'd been keeping them there: birth certificate, passport, bank statements with balances that made me understand how thoroughly he'd stripped her of control. We were stuffing photos and a few clothes into bags when we heard the garage door. He was early. My mom looked at me like, "What now?" And my body answered before my brain did. I called my brother and said, "Come now." Then I hit record on my phone and put it face down on the counter. He walked in all casual, like it was any other Sunday. It took him maybe 10 seconds to register the bags. I'll never forget how fast his face changed. He said my mom's name once, then grabbed her wrist so hard I saw the skin blanch under his fingers. I stepped between them. He went from cold to hot in a breath, turned on me and started in about how I'd poisoned her, and he was done letting me collect his family. My brother pulled into the driveway then and came in like a wall. It got loud. My mom was crying but steady in a way I haven't seen in years. She said, "Let me go," and held her arm out for him to see. Maybe it was the red imprint on her skin, maybe it was the neighbor raised over the fence filming, maybe it was something else, but he let go. We walked out. He followed us to the car, and for a second I thought he might jump in front of it. He didn't. He stood with his hands in his hair and screamed as we drove away. We went straight to the courthouse. My hands didn't stop shaking until I was filling in boxes on a form in bad fluorescent light. They granted an emergency protective order. Reading the paper in my hands made my throat crack in an ugly way. I felt relief and guilt and grief all at the same time. We took my mom to my apartment, and my brother changed the locks himself like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it. My mother slept in my bed and I slept on the couch, and every time a car door closed on the street, I sat up. That afternoon, another thing fell into place. We took my mom's car to get checked because of the air tag. The mechanic waved us over and, with that same low voice the woman at the courthouse had used, showed us a second tracker tucked up near the rear wheel well with zip ties and tape. I think I said "of course" out loud. We took that to the police with the EPO paperwork, the photo of my mom's wrist, and my recording from the kitchen. They took statements. We're documenting everything now, every text and call from unknown numbers. There are a lot. The tone whipsaws, begging, accusing, promising to do better, threatening to expose things that are already exposed. My mom's phone sits face down a lot these days. We also found something that made my stomach to a slow drop. In the folder my mom had hidden, along with the boring practical stuff, there were prints of my messages to friends from years ago, things I'd forgotten I said. He had been reading my messages for who knows how long. I can guess how he did it, and I hate that I can guess. I called my grandmother because I thought she should hear it from me. She already knew. He'd called her earlier in the day and told her his wife had been kidnapped by her ungrateful children and that he was afraid for her safety. I told her exactly what happened. There was a long pause and then she said, "I wondered when this would happen." She didn't mean the kidnapping. She told me he was like this as a teenager, not with trackers and tech obviously, but with people. He used to take the phone off the hook and sit next to it so no one else in the house could use it. He'd hide the car keys because he didn't want my aunt going out. It sounded small, but all those small things make a shape I recognize. She said she loves him and she's afraid of him, and she loves me and she's proud of me. I cried in my car outside the police station until my face hurt. My mom's been here 2 nights. She hasn't gone back for more clothes. We got her a new phone number and a new bank account at a different bank. My brother and I took turns sleeping and answering her questions about work and bills and what she's going to do when the emergency order expires. We found a lawyer for her. She keeps saying, "I can't believe I'm doing this," like she's waiting for permission to change her mind, but she hasn't asked to go back. She made spaghetti last night in my tiny kitchen and handed me a plate like we were on a different timeline where none of this had happened. I don't know what any of this looks like a week from now. I do know he knows where I live, and that's a fact that sits like a stone. I also know the sound of my mom's voice when she said, "I'm ready," and that's the thing I'm holding on to. I meant it when I told her we'd back her financially and emotionally. We are. I meant it when I told him he'd be lucky to be invited to my wedding. He won't be. It feels less like a punishment now and more like the only way there's any hope of peace at all. Update 3. We did a civil standby to get my mom's things. It felt like scheduling a storm. The officer met us 2 houses down and walked us up like we were strangers at our own front door. My mom's hands were steady until the key stuck. I watched her shoulder tighten and then she pushed hard and the lock gave. The air inside was stale and weirdly sweet, like he'd sprayed something to cover whatever was in there. Every picture frame in the hallway was turned face down. That stupid detail made me feel off balance, like we'd walked into a room that knew we were coming. We moved quickly. Shoes first, the good coat she'd had for a decade, her mother's rosary from a drawer she opened with her breath held like it might bite. The officer stood in the kitchen and pretended not to listen. On the counter was a binder with a clear front sleeve and a piece of paper inside it that said evidence in bold, like he'd typed it just to see it in capital letters. We didn't touch it. I took a picture because my hands needed something to do. My mom went to the bedroom and then stopped. She pointed up. There was a smoke detector that didn't match the other smoke detector in the hall. It had a tiny pinhole in the center, and I felt it like a cold draft on the back of my neck. I said her name and the officer came in and looked up at it and then back at us. He said, "Don't take it down," and radioed something in this low, flat voice that made me feel both safer and sicker. We took photos and kept packing. The wedding album was gone. The box with my baby teeth was gone. In their place, a neat stack of printer paper with screenshots. Some were my mom's bank balances, some were snippets of things I'd said in a group chat 3 years ago about a TV show. There was a red pen line under my name like I was a lab report. We left it all exactly where it was. The officer told my mom to make a list of what was missing and to give it to his sergeant and her lawyer. He said the words document everything, and I watched her nod like she'd heard them 100 times and never really believed they applied to her. We were there 28 minutes. That's how long the officer let us be inside. On the way out, I caught the flash of my phone lighting up with an alert I now recognize too easily. Unknown accessory traveling with you. I stood on the front step and emptied my bag on the top stair while my mom held her breath next to me. Nothing. The officer watched us both and said, "Check your car." We did. The mechanic would later call it a tidy job, like it was a compliment. There was a second tracker stuck up under my spare tire with a magnet. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it in my head, like it had always been there, like it had always been part of my car and I just never learned the shape of it. We took that straight to the precinct and added it to a file that now has a tab with our last name on it. We sat on plastic chairs under a TV mounted too high on the wall and wrote our names and dates and the words unknown accessory more times than felt real. I signed my name so carefully it didn't look like mine. The officer who'd met us at the house came out and told us he'd filed a supplemental report about the smoke detector. He used the word covert. My mom stared at the floor like she could fall into it and be warm. That night he didn't call. He didn't call and it was somehow worse. At midnight, my neighbor texted me a video from his porch camera. My father's car rolled past our building twice in under 10 minutes. In the second pass, he slowed and you could see his face in the blue wash of the dashboard, turned toward my windows. He didn't stop. He didn't get out. He didn't have to. We called 911 with the video and the case number and my mouth said the words out loud, violating a protective order. They sent a car to do a patrol and told us to keep our doors locked like that was new advice. I sat with my mom on the couch and watched the shadow of the blind shake on the wall when a truck went by. She kept twisting the ring she had moved to her right hand, around and around until the skin under it went pink, and then white. In the morning, she put on the blue blouse she always wore for interviews and said she was going to talk to HR. I drove her because that felt like a thing I could do. We parked near the front under a camera that was tucked up under an eave, a small black circle that felt like a hook we could hang this new life on. She had a meeting with a woman named Alicia who had the kind of voice that makes you feel like you're not crazy. They took copies of the order and her new number and set up escorts to and from the building. She walked out an hour later flat-footed and taller. He broke the silence in the least surprising way. He called my brother from a new number and left a voicemail where he cried and coughed and told him this was our last chance to do the right thing. Then he texted me the same 3 words in 6 different bubbles, "Come home now." Then, at 3:17 p.m., he walked into the lobby at my mom's work. He wore a button-up and a belt and the same expression he gets when he decides he's going to be the reasonable one in the room and everyone else can just rearrange around that. Security didn't let him make it to the elevators. They had a copy of the order. The guard on the right was the kind of big you don't notice until he stands up. My mom saw him through the glass doors because Alicia had kept her in her office until security texted the all clear. He stood there talking fast and low and then he looked up and saw me across the foyer. I didn't move. The guard put his hand out and my father took a half step back and then he said something that made the guard put his other hand up too. By the time the blue lights reflected off the windows, my mom's hands were still on top of her bag on her lap. She didn't move them. They arrested him quietly, which somehow made my heart pound louder. He tried to look over his shoulder like he was trying to make a point with his eyes and the officer who'd met us at the house was suddenly there, in a different colored uniform, but the same voice. He said my last name and nodded. My mom exhaled a single time like a tire losing air and then sat straighter. They charged him with violating the order and trespass. He was booked and released to a detox cell because he blew over a number I don't want to write down. The charges don't erase the shape of him in the lobby but they draw a line around it. That night our phones went still. No calls. No texts. No unknown numbers. It was like someone unplugged the panic and left the hum. The quiet was so loud I slept sitting up. At 6 a.m., my doorbell rang and I walked to the door and looked through the peephole and saw my grandmother on the other side holding a plastic grocery bag with a loaf of bread in it like an offering. She said, "I thought you might be out of toast," and then, when I opened the door, I have nowhere to put my hands. She sat at my little table and told my mom she'd picked the wrong man young and then tried to fix it with time. She told her she had a spare room and a lock on the inside and that no one had a key but her. My mom cried like she was embarrassed too. It was the first time I'd seen my grandmother choose us and not the idea of him. She ran her finger around the condensation circle her glass left on the table like she was measuring it. We had a court date the next morning for the arraignment on the violation. We sat on a wooden bench with backs that leaned you forward like a reprimand. He came in yesterday's clothes and looked smaller and then spotted us and tried on a smile like a shirt that doesn't fit anymore. The judge called the case and read the file out loud in a voice that didn't rise or fall with any of it. AirTag. Tracker. Workplace. Prior incidents. Protective order. I didn't look at my father again but I could feel him holding himself very still like a person trying not to sneeze. The judge kept the no contact in place and added conditions that made me feel like breathing wasn't going to get me in trouble. No third-party contact. No proximity to residence or place of employment. Surrender of any firearms. Alcohol testing as directed. The words were just words but they landed like furniture in an empty room. You can walk around them. You can sit On the way out of the courthouse, my phone buzzed with an email from my mom's lawyer. She had filed for divorce. The subject line was just my mom's name and the word petition. My mom read it and nodded once like an answer. We drove home and she made eggs with the bread my grandmother had brought and we ate them on the couch, because the table was covered in envelopes with new account numbers and appointment times and a long sheet of paper where we were listing the things she needed to replace that weren't things at all. She circled house key and then wrote next to it, "It's not a thing, it's a feeling," and then underlined it twice like she'd catch it that way. He called once from a blocked number and the voicemail was just breathing and then the sound of a car door opening and closing. We saved it and sent it to the officer with the case number. 2 hours later, a florist delivered flowers and asked for me by name. He had a handwritten note with exactly 4 words on it: "For peace between us." He looked confused when I refused them and even more confused when I asked him if he could leave the card. He shook his head and apologized and left with the bouquet drooping in his arm. I watched him through the peephole too. Later, I found the same 4 words chalked on the sidewalk under my window in a sideways, hurried hand. It rained that night and the chalk smeared into a gray shape, and that felt more accurate. The woman my father had slept with texted me 2 screenshots unprompted. He had tried again from a new number while he was out on bail. "I'm finally free," he'd written to her, and then, "they'll see their mistake." She hadn't replied. She sent me a little blue thumbs down on my phone and I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. It felt wrong and then it felt like air. My mom has an appointment with a counselor at a domestic violence center tomorrow. She said the word out loud for the first time in the car on the way to pick up my grandmother's spare key. "Violence," she said, like she was tasting it. It hung there between us all the way down Maple and then we turned left and it slid around the corner with us. We set up a plan for the hearing to extend the order, and Alicia at my mom's work offered to write a letter about the lobby. My brother's fiance's dad knows a contractor and he came by and put different locks on my apartment and a bar on the back door and wouldn't take money. He left with a plate of leftovers and a hug from my grandmother and said, "That'll do for now," and I believed him. At sunset, my mom and I walked to the end of the block and back. We passed a dog that looked like an old rug and a kid on a scooter who said hi to us 5 times in the same voice like a stuck button. I thought about how small my life felt and how big at the same time. My mom tucked her hand into my elbow like we were walking down the aisle in reverse, backing out of a room that was never ours. I don't know what next week will look like. I don't know if he's going to follow the rules now that a judge said them. I do know my mom sleeps a little deeper. I know my brother didn't move his car for an hour last night just in case. I know the light over my stove has started to buzz and that the sound makes the whole apartment sound alive. He won't be at my wedding. That certainty is a quiet thing now, not a fire. My brother tried on his suit jacket for his own engagement photos and asked me if I wanted to see, and I did, and he looked like the kind of man who knows how to open a door for someone and then get out of the way. My mom watched us and smiled that tight smile that isn't quite ready to open all the way yet. We're not out of it. But there's this small, unbelievable fact: for the first time in a long time, our choices feel like they belong to us. I'm holding on to that the way I held that tracker in my palm. Except this thing is warm. It hums back. It feels like mine. Update 4. The smoke detector wasn't just a smoke detector. A detective called the morning after we turned in the second tracker and asked if we could come down. He had a voice like a paper cut, flat, stinging if you noticed it. In the interview room, he slid a Ziploc across the table with a round white face in it and a tiny pinhole in the center. He said the word lens without any heat. He told us they'd gotten a warrant, gone into the house, and found that in 2 coat hooks that were not meant to hold coats. He didn't say bathroom out loud and I watched my mom's face not say it too. They had pulled cards from the devices and asked if my mom would listen to clips to identify voices. She nodded once like she was taking attendance. He hit play. It was the sound of our kitchen from a different lifetime. Cutlery in a drawer, my mother's voice saying my name in the tone she used when I was little and had to find my shoes. You could hear him humming in the background, like a person in the next room pretending they aren't listening. My mom's mouth made a small perfect circle and then she covered it with her hand. The detective said illegal interception the way you'd identify a species, precise, uninterested in how it makes you feel. They arrested him again that afternoon. We didn't see it. We heard it, the radio crackle in the background on the detective's desk and then the sentence in custody and the noise of chairs moving. This time the charges read longer. The word eavesdropping sat there like it had been waiting its turn. He was held for a night and I do not know what that night looked like. In the morning, a magistrate added a condition that felt like a drawing of a circle around us. He had to wear a GPS monitor. I stood on my porch and looked out at the opposite building's glass and all I could think was that the man who had spent months trying to make small blinking dots out of us had to carry a blinking dot of his own now. It made nothing right, but it made a shape I could live inside for a day. My mother moved into my grandmother's spare room with 2 suitcases and the smell of my apartment still on her sweater. The spare room has wood paneling that looks like the inside of a jewelry box and a cedar smell that gets into your hair. My grandmother had made the bed with the good sheets and laid a towel out on the end of it like a hotel, but the towel was one she'd owned for 20 years and it was thin as paper. My mom put her rosary on the sill and stood for a long time with her hand around it like she was burning a bridge in her palm. That night we ate soup at the little table and my grandmother told a story about her sister's canary. Like all of this was what happens in a life and not the end of something we thought was our life. 2 days later, we had the hearing to extend the protective order. Courtrooms should make you feel small, and this one did. Pews varnished until they reflected your face back to you with a wobble. A flag so clean it looked untouchable. He came in a suit that didn't quite sit on his shoulders right anymore and a band of raw skin around his ankle where the monitor rubbed. He didn't look at us until he did, and then he put on that expression like he was the reasonable man in a movie about unreasonable women. The judge asked him questions in a voice like running water and he answered too quickly at first and then too slowly, like he was teasing sincerity into place with his fingers. Our lawyer, a woman with lipstick the color of brick, walked the court through the air tags, the smoke detector, the lobby arrest. The judge said pattern and then said it again because it sounded like it mattered. The order was extended for a year with conditions stacked on conditions. No third-party contact that smelled like a message, no drive-bys that just happened to be on your way somewhere, alcohol testing, surrender of any devices used to track. He nodded like he was agreeing to help move a couch. Then he tried to talk to my brother in the hallway, started with "I'm doing the program" and a hand out, and my brother, God bless him, just stepped to the right like he was dodging a puddle. The bailiff didn't have to say a word. He just put his body where a sentence would have gone. The program turned out to be a 3-day detox at a private place with soft chairs and a waterfall behind glass. He checked himself in and checked himself out like a person popping in and out of a store. In between, he called my grandmother from a staff phone and told her he was finding God in that voice he uses when he wants to sound gentle but is in a hurry. She told him God lives in houses where the doors have locks, and then she hung up and sat at my mother's feet, actually sat there, on the carpet, and cried like a teenager. I didn't know my grandmother had that sound in her. The next morning, he tried a new angle. A certified letter addressed to me at work, the envelope thick with someone else's handwriting. My heart climbed into my throat on sight. I couldn't bring it inside the building. I stood in the out-of-the-way smoker's corner and slid it with my car key. Inside were printouts of my texts from college that made me sound like a wittier, meaner version of myself, and a typed page that said he would file for defamation if I kept telling lies. The last sentence was, "We can stop this now for peace between us," like the note on the flowers we didn't take, recycled onto a new stage. I walked the envelope across the street to the police substation with trembling hands and the officer behind the glass didn't even blink. She slid me a form and said, "Add it to the file," and I did. The stack has our name on the tab now and someone else's print. It looks ridiculous and necessary at the same time. There was one thing I wasn't ready for. The postal inspector called. I didn't know a postal inspector was a person you could talk to in real life. He said someone had been accessing informed delivery from my mother's address. He said it like a weather report. That someone could see scans of our mail every morning before it showed up. He asked if we'd authorized it. We hadn't. He made a note. It felt like finding a window you didn't know was open and realizing you've been sleeping in a draft for a year. We went to the post office and stood in a line that smelled like rubber bands and old coffee and asked them to put the hold on holds, to shut whatever door that was, and the woman behind the counter nodded like this wasn't the first time she'd heard this sentence and slid a laminated sheet across to us that said how to do it without saying "We know this happens all the time." The detective called again a day later and said a phrase in that same paper-cut voice that I haven't been able to get out of my head: chain of custody. They'd tied one of the trackers to his Apple ID. He said the name of the account and it was the same stupid nickname my father used to write on coolers at family barbecues in Sharpie, like he was branding plastic and it was something grand. It would be almost funny if it didn't make my vision go white for a second. They had also seized a laptop and found a keylogger file with entries like a logbook from a different sea. That part made my mom hold onto the edge of the counter until her knuckles went the color of paper. He had been sailing right through our days while we made the bed and fed the cat and thought we were normal. The detective said there would likely be more charges, slowly, like he didn't want to feed the part of my brain that wants a list of bad things to check off one by one. There have been small bright things. My mom went to the domestic violence center and sat in a circle of women who answered each other's sentences. She came home and put her folder down on the table and said, "They used the word survivor like it was an invitation," and then picked it up again and went to the spare room and shut the door and cried in a way that was new, softer, a release instead of a choke. Alicia wrote a letter for the hearing and emailed the security footage from the lobby. It is backed up in 3 places now and my brother treats those backups like they are living animals he has to feed. My grandmother's neighbor came over with a loaf of banana bread and an extension cord and installed motion lights that flick on like applause if a cat sneezes. We opened the door to a waitress with a cardboard box from my mother's job with the plants from her desk tucked in at an angle and a sticky note on one of the leaves that said, "You're not crazy," in a slanted hand. The monstera drooped and then perked back up as if water was enough. Last night, I was brushing my teeth when a little whining sound went past the bathroom window. It was too smooth to be a car. I turned the light off and stood there in the dark with toothpaste burning my tongue and watched a drone drift across the slice of sky above the alley and then hover like it was thinking. My whole body went to ice. The window is small and high and doesn't actually show you much, but the noise was all around. I said my mom's name like a question and she came in and we stood shoulder to shoulder in the dark like kids at a sleepover waiting for the scary part to end. My brother was already downstairs by the time I called him, phone to his ear, shoes half on. By the time he hit the sidewalk with the contractor's borrowed flashlight, the drone was a dot and then a nothing. He called 911 and the dispatch asked about it in a tone like a script. An officer came, took the report, looked up at the quiet air the way you look at a lake after the fish goes under. He said he'd add it to the file. I went inside and sat on the edge of the tub and spit toothpaste out into an empty sink and watched it spiral like it was a message I couldn't read. This morning, there was blue tape on the inside of my grandmother's front door, a little square the detective had stuck there, himself, all the way in, all the way out, so they can tell if someone has been inside. It made my grandmother laugh for the first time since the courthouse. We used to use hair, she said, and then we were all three of us laughing and it tasted like relief and something metal. My mom opened her email to a message from her lawyer with dates and words that used to belong to other people's lives, disclosures, custody of property, hearing on temporary support. She signed a thing and then another thing and then she set the pen down very gently like it might break if she breathed on it. She looked up at me and said, "Did you know the spare room window sticks?" Like a person trying a sentence to see if it fits in the mouth. He won't be at my wedding. I'm not carrying that like a weapon anymore, more like a fact the way you know where the light switches in the dark. My brother texted me a picture of his suit on a hanger with a note that said, "Tie practice tonight?" And afterward we stood in my grandmother's narrow hallway, knotting and unknotting cheap silk, and my mom watched us from the doorway with that almost smile that is still learning to open. The GPS monitor on his ankle is somewhere out there blinking its small, dumb light. The motion light over my grandmother's driveway blinks back sometimes when a moth goes by. The difference is I know which one belongs to me. I know which one is trying to scare me and which one is trying to say, "We see you." We do.